Hey everyone, I am Mary Beth McAndrews from Dread Central, and I am here today with Kyle Edward Ball, the director of Skinamarink. Hello, how are you?
Hello. Good.
I am very excited to talk with you about this movie that has like kind of ruined my psyche. Thank you so much for that. But
Mm.
would love just for people who maybe haven't heard about Skinamarink, can you just tell viewers a little bit about the film, what it
Yeah,
is?
for sure. So Skinamarink is a lo-fi experimental movie. It's about two little kids who wake up in one night to discover that their dad is missing and all the doors and windows in their house have disappeared. So they chill for a bit, watch cartoons, kind of uh, segue into a little slumber party atmosphere. And after a while, it becomes apparent that there might be something else in the house with them. Yeah.
Hell yeah. And so I've seen your short film Heck, which is kind of like, proof of concept maybe for Skinamarink. And so I wanted to hear more about how long this idea or this kind of concept has been percolating in your mind.
It's been years. So ever since I was a little kid, I wanted to do a big scary house movie. I think most horror directors do. And then after a while, through my YouTube channel, people kept commenting kind of shades of the same nightmare they remember from childhood. So I'm in my house, I'm alone, and there's a monster. And then that had kind of transitioned and changed. And um, the idea for the feature has gone through different iterations in my mind.
Yeah.
And then about 2-ish years ago, I put pen to paper, well, finger to keyboard and started writing the script. And yeah, and then even this version now, it's went through different shades in editing, but here we are today.
Hell yeah. Well, you talk about nightmares, and like this movie took me back to when I lived out of like the first place I lived with my stepdad and my mom when they got together and waking up at 3 in the morning. Like I have not thought about that part of my life in forever. And somehow, and I think you probably heard this from multiple people, how that taps
Mhm.
into that. And so I'm so curious how you kind of went about capturing that and what your I mean, like you captured incredibly well. And I especially through these kind of like almost photo montage sequences. And I wanted to hear
Mhm.
more about that and kind of why you wanted to approach it with that kind of technique rather than what we usually see in a horror movie.
Yeah. So the style was developed through my YouTube channel because I
Yeah.
didn't have actors a lot of the time. So I'd have to do creative things like film different corners of the room while we were being guided along in the story. And then that kind of fit like a glove. And the thing is, a lot of times in movies, things happen by accident or on purpose, and the lines between those two kind of blur. So I set out rules from the beginning. We never see the characters' faces. All dialogue is delivered off screen. Some of those were things that took budget into account, but other things were, well, it's a bit budget, but it's a bit, oh, that could help the atmosphere, right? And other things kind of blended together too. So I was able to film in the house I grew up in, and that a little bit was budget, but also a little bit, well, because it's so personal, that will by accident maybe help the way I approach writing the script, approach shooting it, approach editing it. And then through the whole process, I did want to really replicate the feeling of being a little kid in the house in the dark. And I think a lot of people with their movies, they want to achieve that, but I'm so thrilled that people have actually responded to that in such a profound way. And um, another thing was I wanted to make a movie that I would want to see. And I think a lot of filmmakers, they think, oh, I'll make a movie the audience wants to see instead of something I want to see or want to make. And you'd be surprised how often those two things actually overlap more than you expect. And the thing is, from the beginning, if you set, these are my building blocks. You'd be surprised if you spend a lot of time setting the rules of the game and setting these are the blocks I'm going to play with, how much that will pay off. So using toys that you actually played with as a little kid. A lot of those toys were my actual toys as a little kid.
The phone,
Um,
the creepy phone with like the
that's
phone.
a weird one too, because I don't remember playing with that as a kid. I just remember it vaguely from like, oh, this is the kid area of the dentist's office. And then when we were looking through, my mom, God bless her, saved a bunch of keepsakes and toys from when we were little. And I, in the props sheet, I always had that as a choir. So I have to either find it on eBay or
Okay.
even order it. And then we were looking through the toy bin, and guess who's staring up at me? That fucking phone. And I'm like, I
It
pulled it
was
out. I'm like,
waiting for you.
yeah, I'm like, Mom, I didn't know we had this, but this is in the script. And she's like, oh, neat. And
She's like, okay.
yeah. So,
That's so cool.
and
Oh, sorry.
yeah, it's when you put so much time and approach things uncynically and from a good place, you'd be surprised how often things like that happen,
Yeah.
right? So yeah.
Well, and well, so okay, my this is like a preface to my next question, but and you've had these, you've had these similar experiences of waking up in the middle of the night and seeing the light, and that's you're pulling from experience. So, oh, you're filming in your childhood house. You're using these toys. Then was this like any kind of weird emotional experience for you to be filming this in your home? Like, was it a strange kind of emotional experience for you in even just making the movie?
It was, but not as much as you would think, but it hits
Cool.
you in weird ways.
Okay.
So through a lot of it, you're approaching it. There's parts where you're writing it and you feel all this emotion, and then you do all these things to kind of distance from the emotion by accident. So just, setting up shot list and breakdowns and stuff. And after a while, the emotion kind of gets put on the back burner, but then in weird ways, it comes up again. So on our last day of shooting, we filmed in my bedroom, and there's only a handful of shots in the movie that are filmed in my actual bedroom
Yeah.
because like it's my mom's office right now. And
Oh,
so we couldn't really explore that area too much, so we had to do creative things with angling. And but on the last day when we were filming in here, I had this weird like, oh, I can't believe I'm doing this. I can't believe the bedroom that I grew up in my whole childhood, which is now my mom's office, that I thought about for years as a little kid. Oh, one day I'm going to make a movie, that we're filming in here. This is so, and I said to my assistant director and my DOP, I explained, I'm like, this is so weird. I can't believe I'm filming in my childhood bedroom. It just feels so strange. And there was lots of little parts like that making it where it's like, that's weird that that happened, right?
that's so
So yeah.
cool. So you did a really awesome interview with Roger Ebert, and you talked about how it's like we're in a new queer genre cinema movement. And I fucking love
Which
that.
Jane Schuburn saw and highlighted and retweeted. Yeah. So
And I wanted to hear more about like your like thinking about that. I know it's a big question, but like I agree that we are in this really cool new queer horror moment with, obviously with We're All Going to the World's Fair, with the upcoming Outwaters. There's so many
mhm.
queer horror movies. And I just wanted to hear more about you saying that, like what you're seeing with especially your film becoming so virally popular.
Yeah, and it's a weird thing too, because if you watch the Outwaters, so coming through the 90s and the 2000s, it felt like queer movies, they had to be overtly queer.
Yeah.
And now we're in this era where LGBT filmmakers don't feel like they have to shoehorn that in, and they can just, I could just make a movie about myself as a little kid, and there doesn't need to be anything necessarily LGBT in it. Or in the case of We're All Going to the World's Fair, playing with ideas of being trans
Yeah.
and body dysphoria in such an amazing, weird way. And it's it feels like we are almost in, it sounds so pretentious, but even like post new queer wave cinema, right? Like
No,
where,
but you're right though, because we
yeah,
did go through that phase of like we want to have queer representation, but we don't, and it's like not thinking about how queer directors maybe just want to make movies of their own without having to
yeah,
be like, I'm gay. You know what I yeah, you know what I mean.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
But playing with form, because I mean, you are playing with format in such a unique way, and like, you know, not a lot of films, the way that's how you tackle with your way you look at form and film grain, and the way that, you know, Jane Schoenbrunn does. And it's really awesome to see playing with form in this kind of
Hmm.
new post-queer horror cinema. It's so cool.
Yeah, and it's so fun. And it's again one of those things where horror is always the most interesting thing. I like horror just keeps having to reinvent itself
Yeah.
over the years and years and years in a way that a movie like All the President's Men, if you take a procedural like that and compare it to Spotlight, they're so similar in so many ways. And I'm not shitting on either of those. I love both those movies, but horror just keeps having to reinvent itself, because as soon as a horror filmmaker sees a movie, we're like, consider that copied, right? And then we
Yeah.
copy it, and then it just keeps having to refresh. And in the case of Skinamarink, go backwards and say, I'm going to go back to the 70s again. And it's fun. Horror is such an amazing, fun area to live in. People have asked me, do you want to keep doing horror? I'm like, absolutely. Why wouldn't I? So.
That's amazing. So have you seen La Jetée, I think it's called?
Oh yeah, yeah.
So it's
12
funny.
monkeys, point five, right? Yeah.
So my husband, I was like, he's seeing Skinamarink with me on Friday. I was like, watch the short film, like, get excited. He's like, this reminds me exactly of this film I saw
Oh
in
yeah.
college. And I
That was
wanted
when that was Kyle, when it's like, I'm gonna be edgy and watch experimental stuff, and I'm gonna watch Kenneth Anger and Lejeté, and yeah.
that's so cool. Okay. My husband
Mhm.
will be very excited to hear about that.
Mhm.
But so I also wanted to ask about the title. I mean, not, you know, just to get too into it, but why Skinamarink? What
So
was
here's the story.
okay.
Okay, so context. There in North America, there's a children's musical act called Sharon Lois and Bram. One of them has passed, and but they still do stuff from time to time. And that's how I was introduced to the song, as a lot of other people in North America, particularly in Canada. And so that's kind of just an intrinsic part of my childhood. I was watching a Elizabeth Taylor movie. I don't know if it was Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. It's the Tennessee Williams one where I don't know if it's Paul Newman or something, is an
I know what you're
alcoholic.
talking about.
Yeah, yeah. And so in that movie from the 50s, there's a kid's birthday party and they sing that song. And I'm like, what? That's from the 80s, 90s, right? And then I researched the song and I'm like, oh, it's actually a traditional song from turn of the century. It was originally in a musical, and even that, it may have come from word of mouth. For all we know, it comes from the Appalachian Mountains in the 19th century. We don't know. And I'm like, so I found it and I'm like, oh, this is actually not Sharon Lois and Bram. They've actually said, no, this is a traditional song that I heard from here, blah, blah, blah. So it batted around in my mind, and I'm like, A, that word is not copyrighted, so could maybe use it as a title. B, it checks a lot of boxes for me. It has a hard sound in it, the two biggest brands in the world for a while. And I think this may be pseudo debunked, but we're Kodak and Coca-Cola. And there's an idea that the sound has has power to it. Um, Scarred for Life, for example. And then I said, okay, it's an earworm too. The word sticks in your head, the song sticks in your head. It's something that feels personal to me, but also feels personal to others. Excellent working title. I'll come up with a better title later. And here we are.
It's such a good title though, because everyone is like the song, right? I'm like, oh yeah, but like scary.
Yeah, in a way that for a while, even I considered the song that never ends, right? Because that
Yes.
plays, but then I'm like, no, let's go with Skinamarink and let's take out one of the ends so that if you Google search the Sharon Lois and Brand one with two ends after skin versus this one, kids won't accidentally find this
Oh.
movie by accident, right? So the internet age kind of figured into it, right? So, and I think for the most part, if you spell it the kids song way, you won't be directed to the movie, and vice versa.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah,
Wild.
hopefully you won't be directed to the
You might in fact be the scarred for life pick for someone in the future of your film.
yeah, I hope so.
Well, Kyle, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me about Skinamarink. I'm so excited for the world to experience your horrifying new film.
Yeah, for sure. And you were one of the original Fantasia people, right? You saw it through a press screener on your
Yeah, I saw it
computer
at
though, right? Yeah.
Fantasia. I didn't review it for the website, but I talked about it a lot. So
I remember,
I've
yeah.
been preaching the good word of Skinamarink since I saw it at Fantasia. So I'm so glad it's going to be out there with the world.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Kyle.